Hello, everybody. How are we doing tonight? All right, so yesterday was a little bit intense, so I'll do a quick refresher. Let's see. Chapter 9. Chapter 9 had them go into Hagrid's castle, and Schmendrick replaced Mabrook, who was the court wizard for King Hagrid, capable of much stronger true magic, but notably didn't make King Hagrid any happier for it. So Schmendrick's bumbling worked in his favor. Molly got assigned as a scullery maid and a house servant, and the unicorn, going by Lady Amalthea, basically is just allowed to exist however she wants. Chapter 10 sees Prince Lear trying to figure out a way to court the Lady Amalthea, thinking that going on a bunch of brave escapades will help him look better for her. It does not. Then a cat started talking and told Molly about finding the unicorns before the time runs out and Amalthea becomes too human to ever return to her unicorn self. And then chapter 11 has Prince Lear coming back from another adventure, and King Hagrid basically saying, "I know what you are," to Lady Amalthea, and trying to convince her to reveal her unicorn nature, even showing her that the other unicorns are in the waves of the sea that are right outside the castle. But she seems almost too far gone. The Red Bull doesn't even search for her anymore. So, with all that said, let us begin our final stretch and finish up the story. 1 second, let me just go ahead and also make sure my background music is playing so that there's a little bit of ambiance. Okay. Excellent. Okay, chapter 12. In the great hall of King Hagrid's castle, the clock struck 6. Actually, it was 11 minutes past midnight, but the hall was little darker than it had been at 6 o'clock or at noon. Yet those who lived in the castle told time by the difference in the dark. There were hours when the hall was cold simply for want of warmth and gloomy for lack of light, when the air was stale and still and the stones stank of old water because there were no windows to let in the scouring wind. That was daytime. But at night, as some trees hold a living light all day, hold it with the undersides of their leaves until long after sundown, so at night the castle was charged and swarming with darkness, alive with darkness. Then the great hall was cold for a reason. Then the small sounds that slept by day woke up to patter and scratch in the corners. It was night when the old smell of the stones seemed to rise from far below the floor. "Light a light," Molly Grew said. "Please, can you make a light?" Schmendrick muttered something curt and professional. For a moment nothing happened, but then a strange, sallow brightness began to spread over the floor, scattering itself about the room in a thousand scurrying shards that shone and squeaked. The little night beasts of the castle were glowing like fireflies. They darted here and there in the hall, raising swift shadows with their sickly light and making the darkness even colder than before. "I wish you hadn't done that," Molly said. "Can you turn them off again? The purple ones, anyway, with the legs, I guess." "No, I can't," Schmendrick answered crossly. "Be quiet. Where's the skull?" The Lady Amalthea could see it grinning from a pillar, lemon small in the shadows, and dim as the morning moon, but she said nothing. She had not spoken since she came down from the tower. "There," the magician said. He strode to the skull and peered into its split and crumbling eye sockets for a long time, nodding slowly and making solemn sounds to himself. Molly Grew stared with equal earnestness, but she glanced often at the Lady Amalthea. At last Schmendrick said, "All right, don't stand so close." "Are there really spells to make a skull speak?" Molly asked. The magician stretched out his fingers and gave her a small, competent smile. "There are spells to make everything speak. The master wizards were great listeners, and they devised ways to charm all things of the world, living and dead, into talking to them. That is most of it, being a wizard. Seeing and listening." He drew a long breath, suddenly looking away and rubbing his hands together. "The rest is technique," he said. "Well, here we go." Abruptly he turned to face the skull, put one hand lightly on the pale crown, and addressed it in a deep, commanding voice. The words marched out of his mouth like soldiers, their steps echoing with power as they crossed the dark air, but the skull made no answer at all. "I just wondered," the magician said softly. He lifted his hand from the skull and spoke to it again. This time the sound of the spell was reasonable and cajoling, almost plaintive. The skull remained silent, but it seemed to Molly that a wakefulness slipped across the faceless front and was gone again. In the scuttling light of the radiant vermin, the Lady Amalthea's hair shone like a flower, appearing neither interested nor indifferent, but quiet in the way that a battlefield is sometimes quiet. She watched as Schmendrick recited one incantation after another to a desert-colored knob of bone that spoke not one word more than she did. Each charm was uttered in a more despairing tone than the last, but the skull would not speak. And yet Molly Grew was certain that it was aware and listening, and amused. She knew the silence of mockery too well to mistake it for death. The clock struck 29. At least it was at that point that Molly lost count. The rusty strokes were still clanging to the floor when Schmendrick suddenly shook both fists at the skull and shouted, all right for you, you pretentious kneecap. How would you like a punch to the eye?" On the last words his voice unraveled completely into a snarl of misery and rage. "That's right," the skull said. "Yell. Wake up, old haggard." Its own voice sounded like branches creaking and knocking together in the wind. "Yell louder," it said. "The old man's probably around here somewhere. He doesn't sleep much." Molly gave a small cry of delight, and even the Lady Amalthea moved a step closer. Schmendrick stood with his fist shut and no triumph in his face. The skull said, "Come on, ask me how to find the Red Bull. You can't go wrong asking my advice. I'm the king's watchman, set to guard the way to the bull. Even Prince Lear doesn't know the secret way, but I do." A little timidly, Molly Grew asked, "If you're truly on guard here, why don't you give the alarm? Why do you offer to help us instead of summoning the men-at-arms?" The skull gave a rattling chuckle. "I've been up on this pillar a long time," it said. "I was Haggard's chief henchman once, until he smote off my head for no reason. That was back in the days when he was being wicked to see if that was what he really liked to do. It wasn't, but he thought he might as well get some use out of my head, so he stuck it up here to serve as his sentinel. Under the circumstances, I'm not as loyal to King Haggard as I might be." Schmendrick spoke in a low voice. "Answer the riddle, then. Tell us the way to the Red Bull." "No," said the skull. Then it laughed like mad. "Why not?" Molly cried furiously. "What kind of a game—" The skull's long yellow jaws never moved, but it was some time before the mean laughter chattered to a halt. Even the hurrying night things paused for a moment, stranded in their candy light until it stopped. "I'm dead," said the skull. "I'm dead, and I'm hanging in the dark watching over Haggard's property. The only small amusement I have is to irk and exasperate the living, and I don't get much chance of that. It's a sad loss, because in life, mine was a particularly exasperating nature. You'll pardon me, I'm sure, if I indulge myself with you a little. Try me tomorrow. Maybe I'll tell you tomorrow."
"But we have no time," Molly pleaded. Schmendrick nudged her, but she rushed on, stepping close to the skull and appealing directly to its uninhabited eyes. "We have no time. We may be too late now."
"I have time," the skull replied reflectively. "It's really not so good to have time. Rush, scramble, desperation. This missed, that left behind. Those others too big to fit into such a small space. That's the way life was meant to be. You're supposed to be too late for some things. Don't worry about it."
Molly would have entreated further, but the magician gripped her arm and pulled her aside. "Be still," he said in a swift, fierce voice. "Not a word, not another word. The damn thing spoke, didn't it? Maybe that's all the riddle requires."
"It isn't,"
the skull informed him.
"I'll talk as much as you like, but I won't tell you anything. That's pretty rotten, isn't it? You should have seen me when I was alive."
Schmendrick paid no attention. "Where's the wine?" he demanded of Molly. "Let me see what I can do with the wine." "I couldn't find any," she said nervously. "I looked everywhere, but I don't think there's a drop in the castle." The magician glared at her in vast silence. "I looked," she said. Schmendrick raised both arms slowly and let them fall to his sides. "Well," he said, "well, that's it then, if we can't find the wine. I have my illusions, but I can't make wine out of the air." The skull giggled in a clacking, talky way.
"Matter can neither be created nor destroyed," it remarked. "Not by most magicians, anyway."
From a fold of her dress, Molly produced a small flask that gleamed faintly in the darkness. She said, "I thought if you had some water to start with—" Schmendrick and the skull gave her very much the same look. "Well, it's been done," she said loudly. "It's not as though you'd have to make up something new. I'd never ask that of you." Hearing herself, she looked sideways at the Lady Amalthea, but Schmendrick took the flask from her hand and studied it thoughtfully, turning it over and murmuring curious, fragile words to himself. Finally he said, "Why not? As you say, it's a standard trick. There was quite a vogue for it at one time, I remember, but it's really a bit dated these days." He moved one hand slowly over the flask, weaving a word into the air. What are you doing? The skull asked eagerly. Hey, do it closer. Do it over here. I can't see a thing. The magician turned away, holding the flask to his breast and bowing over it. He began a whispery chant that made Molly think of the sounds that a dead fire continues to make, long after the last coal has faded. You understand, he said, interrupting himself. It won't be anything special. Vin ordinaire, if that. Molly nodded solemnly. Schmendrick said, and it's usually too sweet, and how I'm supposed to get it to drink itself I haven't the faintest idea. He took up the incantation again, even more softly, while the skull complained bitterly that it couldn't see or hear anything. Molly said something quiet and hopeful to the Lady Amalthea, who neither looked at her nor replied. The chant stopped abruptly, and Schmendrick raised the flask to his lips. He sniffed at it first, muttering, Weak, weak. Hardly any bouquet at all. Nobody ever made good wine by magic. Then he tilted it to drink, then shook it, then stared at it, and then with a small, horrible smile turned it over. Nothing ran out. Nothing at all. That's done it, Schmendrick said almost cheerfully. He touched a dry tongue to his dry lips and repeated, That's done it. That has finally done it. Still smiling, he lifted the flask again to hurl it across the hall. No, wait, hey, don't! The skull's clattering voice protested so wildly that Schmendrick halted before the flask left his hand. He and Molly turned together to regard the skull, which, so great was its anguish, had actually begun to wriggle where it hung, cracking its weathered occiput hard against the pillar as it strove to free itself. Don't do that, it wailed. You people must be crazy throwing away wine like that. Give it to me if you don't want it, but don't throw it away. It rocked and lurched on the pillar, whimpering. A dreamy, wondering look crossed Schmendrick's face, rather like a rain cloud drifting over Dry County. Slowly he asked, And what use have you for wine, with no tongue to taste it, no ribby palate to savor it, no gullet to gulp it down? 50 years dead, can it be that you still remember? Still desire? 50 years dead, what else can I do? The skull had ceased its grotesque twitching, but frustration had made its voice almost human. I remember, it said. I remember more than wine. Give me a swallow, that's all. Give me a sip, and I'll taste it as you never will with all your runny flesh, all your buds and organs. I've had time to think. I know what wine is like. Give it to me. There's an image here. Go ahead and share it. Schmendrick shook his head, grinning. He said, Eloquent, but I've been feeling a bit spiteful myself lately. For a third time he lifted the empty flask, and the skull groaned in mortal misery. Out of pity, Molly Grew began to say, But it isn't. But the magician stepped on her foot. Of course, he mused aloud, if you should happen to remember the entrance to the Red Bull's cavern as well as you remember wine, we might bargain yet. He twiddled the flask casually between two fingers. Done, the skull cried instantly. Done, for a dram, but give it to me now. I am more thirsty with thinking of wine than ever I was in life when I had a throat to be dry. Only give me a single swig now, and I'll tell you anything you want to know. The rusted jaws were beginning to grind sideways on each other. The skull's slaty teeth were trembling and splitting. Give it to him, Molly whispered to Schmendrick. She was terrified that the naked eye sockets might start to fill up with tears, but Schmendrick shook his head again. I will give it all to you, he said to the skull, after you tell us how we may find the bowl. The skull sighed, but never hesitated. The way is through the clock, it said. You simply walk through the clock, and there you are. Now can I have the wine? Through the clock. The magician turned to peer into a far corner of the great hall, where the clock stood. It was tall and black and thin, the sundown shadow of a clock. The glass over its face was broken, and the hour hand was gone. Behind gray glass the works could barely be seen, twitching and turning as fretfully as fish. Schmendrick said, "You mean when the clock strikes the right time, it opens, and then there is a tunnel, a hidden stair." His voice was doubtful, for the clock seemed far too lean to conceal any such passageway. "I don't know anything about that," the skull replied. "If you wait for this clock to strike the hour, you'll be here till you're as bald as I am. Why complicate a simple secret? You walk through the clock, and the Red Bull's on the other side. Gimme!" But the cat said, Schmendrick began. Then he turned and walked toward the clock. The darkness made him seem to be going away down a hill, growing small and stooped. When he reached the clock, he kept walking without pause, as though it were truly no more than a shadow. But he bumped his nose. "This is stupid," he said coldly to the skull as he returned. "How do you think to cheat us? The way to the bowl may well lead through the clock, but there's something more to know. Tell me, or I will spill the wine out on the floor for you to remember the smell and look of it as much as you choose. Be quick." But the skull was laughing again, this time making a thoughtful, almost kindly noise. "Remember what I told you about time," it said. "When I was alive, I believed, as you do, that time was at least as real and solid as myself, and probably more so. I said 1 o'clock as though I could see it, and Monday as though I could find it on the map. And I let myself be hurried along from minute to minute, day to day, year to year, as though I were actually moving from one place to another. Like everyone else, I lived in a house, bricked up with seconds and minutes, weekends and New Year's days, and I never went outside until I died because there was no other door. Now I know that I could have walked through the walls." Molly blinked bewilderedly, but Schmendrick was nodding. "Yes," he said. "That's how the real magicians do it, but then the clock—" "The clock will never strike the right time," the skull said. "Hagrid scrambled the works long ago one day when he was trying to grab hold of time as it swung by. But the important thing is for you to understand that it doesn't matter whether the clock strikes 10 next, or 7, or 15 o'clock. You can strike your own time and start the count anywhere. When you understand that, then any time at all will be the right time for you." At that moment, the clock struck 4. The last bang had not yet faded when there came an answering sound from beneath the great hall. Neither a bellow nor the savage grumble that the Red Bull often made when he dreamed. It was a low, inquiring sound, as though the bull had awakened, sensing something new in the night. Every flagstone buzzed like a snake, and the darkness itself seemed to shudder as the glowing night creatures scampered wildly to the edges of the hall. Molly knew, suddenly and surely, that King Hagrid was near. "Give me the wine," the skull said. "I have kept my part of the bargain." Silently, Schmendrick tipped the empty flask to the empty mouth, and the skull gurgled and sighed and smacked. "Ah," it said at last. "That was the real stuff. That was wine. You're more of a magician than I took you for. Do you understand me now about time?" "Yes," Schmendrick answered. "I think so." The Red Bull made his curious sound again, and the skull rattled against the pillar. Schmendrick said, "No, I don't know. Is there no other way?" "How can there be?" Molly heard footsteps, then nothing. Then the thin, cautious ebb and flow of breathing. She could not tell where it came from. Schmendrick turned to her, and his face seemed to be smudged from within like the inside of a lantern glass, with fear and confusion. There was a light, too, but it shook like a lantern in the storm. "I think I understand," he said, "but I'm sure I don't. I'll try." "I still think it's a real clock," Molly said. "That's all right, though. I can walk through a real clock." She spoke partly to comfort him, but she felt a brightness in her own body as she realized that what she had said was true. "I know where we have to go," she said, "and that's as good as knowing the time any day." The skull interrupted her. It said, I'll give you a bit of advice in the bargain, because the wine was so good. Schmendrick looked guilty. The skull said, Smash me. Just knock me to the floor and let me break in pieces. Don't ask why. Just do it. It was speaking very quickly, almost whispering. Together, Schmendrick and Molly said, What? Why? The skull repeated its request. Schmendrick demanded, What are you saying? Why on earth should we break you? Do it! The skull insisted. Do it! The sound of breath came nearer from all directions, though only on one pair of feet. No, Schmendrick said. You're crazy. He turned his back and started a second time toward the gaunt, dark clock. Molly took the Lady Amalthea by her cold hand and followed him, trailing the white girl like a kite. All right, the skull said. I warned you. In a terrible voice, a voice like hail on iron, it began at once to cry, Help ho, the king! Guards, to me! Here are burglars, bandits, moss troopers, kidnappers, housebreakers, murderers, character assassins, plagiarists. King Haggard! Ho, King Haggard! Now over their heads and all around them, feet came clattering, and they heard the whistling voices of the aged men-at-arms calling as they ran. No torches flared, for no light could be struck in the castle unless the king himself ordered it, and Hagrid was yet silent. The three thieves stood confounded and undone, gaping helplessly at the skull. I'm sorry, it said. I'm just like that, treacherous. But I did try. Then its vanished eyes suddenly saw the Lady Amalthea, and they went wide and bright, although they could not have. Oh no, it said softly. No, you don't. I'm disloyal, but I'm not that disloyal. Run, Schmendrick said, as he had said it long ago to the wild, sea-white legend that he had just set free. They fled across the great hall while the men-at-arms blundered loudly in the dark, and the skull shrieked, Unicorn! Unicorn! Haggard! Haggard! There she goes! Down to the Red Bull! Mind the clock, Haggard! Where are you? Unicorn! Unicorn! Then the king's voice, rustling savagely under the uproar. Fool! Traitor! It was you who told her! His quick, secret footsteps sounded close by, and Schmendrick set himself to turn and fight. But there came a grunt, and a crack, and a scraping noise, and then the bouncing crunch of old bone on old stone. The magician ran on. When they stood before the clock, there was little grace either for doubting or understanding. The men-at-arms were in the hall now, and their clashing steps sent echoes booming back and forth between the walls, while King Haggard hissed and cursed them on. The Lady Amalthea never hesitated. She entered the clock and vanished as the moon passes behind clouds, hidden by them, but not in them, thousands of miles alone. As though she were a dryad, Molly thought madly, and time were her tree. Through the dim, speckled glass, Molly could see the weights and the pendulum and the cankered chimes, all swaying and burning as she stared. There was no door beyond, through which the Lady Amalthea might have gone. There was only the rusty avenue of the works, leading her eyes away into rain. The weights drifted from side to side like seaweed. King Haggard was shouting, Stop them! Smash the clock! Molly began to turn her head, meaning to tell Schmendrick that she thought she knew what the skull had meant, but the magician had disappeared, and so had the great hall of King Haggard. The clock was gone too, and she was standing beside the Lady Amalthea in a cold place. The king's voice came to her from very far away, not so much heard as remembered. She went on turning her head, and found herself looking into the face of Prince Lear. Behind him there fell a bright mist, shivering like the sides of a fish, and bearing no resemblance at all to corroded clockwork. Schmendrick was nowhere to be seen. Prince Lear bent his head gravely to Molly, but it was to the Lady Amalthea that he spoke first. And you would have gone without me, he said. You haven't been listening at all. She answered him then, when she had not spoken to Molly or the magician. In a low, clear voice, she said, I would have come back, I do not know why I am here, or who I am, but I would have come back. No, said the prince, you would never have come back. Before he could say anything more, Molly broke in, much to her own surprise, crying, Never mind all that. Where's Schmendrick? The two strangers looked at her in courteous wonder that anyone else in the world should be able to speak, and she felt herself shake once from head to heels. Where is he? She demanded. I'll go back myself if you won't. And she turned round again. He came out of the mist, walking with his head down, as though he were leaning against a strong wind. He was holding a hand to his temple, and when he took it away, the blood came softly down. It's all right, he said when he saw that the blood was falling on Mollygrew's hands. It's all right. It's not deep. I couldn't get through until it happened. He bowed shakily to Prince Lear. I thought it was you who went by me in the dark, he said. Tell me, how did you pass through the clock so easily? The skull said you didn't know the way. The prince looked puzzled. What way? He asked. What was there to know? I saw where she had gone, and I followed. Schmendrick's sudden laugh rubbed itself raw against the snaggy walls that came swimming in on them, as their eyes grew familiar with this new darkness. Of course, he said. Some things have their own time by nature. He laughed again, shaking his head, and the blood flew. Molly tore a piece out of her dress. Those poor old men, the magician said. They didn't want to hurt me, and I wouldn't have hurt them if I could. We dodged around and around, apologizing to each other, and Haggard was yelling, and I kept bumping into the clock. I knew that it wasn't a real clock, but it felt real, so I worried about it. Then Haggard came up with his sword and hit me. He closed his eyes as Molly bowed his head. Haggard, he said. I was getting to like him. I still do. He looked so frightened. The dim, removed voices of the king and his men seemed to be growing louder. I don't understand, Prince Lear said. Why was he frightened, my father? What did he... But just then, from the far side of the clock, they heard a wordless squall of triumph and the beginning of a great crash. The shimmering haze vanished immediately, and black silence caved in on them all. Haggard has destroyed the clock, Schmendrick said presently. Now there's no way back, and no way out. But the bull's way. A slow, thick wind began to wake. Chapter 13. The way was wide enough for all of them to walk abreast, but they went one by one. The Lady Amalthea walked in front, by her own choosing. Prince Lear, Schmendrick, and Mollygrue, following, had only her hair for lantern, but she herself had no light before her at all. Yet she went on as easily as though she had been this way before. Where they truly were, they never knew. The cold wind seemed real, as did the cold reek that rode it, and the darkness let them pass far more grudgingly than had the clock. The path itself was enough of a fact to bruise feet, and to be partly choked in places by real stones and real earth that had crumbled down the sides of the cave. But its course was the impossible way of a dream, pitched and skewed, rounding on itself, now dropping almost sheer, now seeming to rise a little, now working out and slowly again, and now wandering back to take them, perhaps, once again below the great hall where old King Haggard must still be raging over a toppled clock and a shivered skull. Witch work, surely, Schmendrick thought, and nothing made by a witch is real, at the least. Then he added, but this must be the last. It will all be real enough if this is not the last.
As they stumbled along, he hurriedly told Prince Lear the tale of their adventures, beginning with his own strange history and stranger doom, recounting the ruin of the Midnight Carnival and his flight with the unicorn, and continuing through their meeting with Molly Grew, the journey to Hagsgate, and Drin's story of the double curse on the town and the tower. Here he halted, for beyond lay all the Knights of the Red Bull, a night that ended, for good or ill, with magic, and with a naked girl who struggled in her body like a cow in quicksand. He hoped that the prince would be more interested in learning of his heroic birth than in the origins of the Lady Amalthea. Prince Lear marveled suspiciously, which is an awkward thing to manage. I have known for a very long time that the king is not my father, he said, but I tried hard to be his son all the same. I'm the enemy of any who plot against him, and it would take more than a crone's gibbering to make me work his downfall. As for the other, I think there are no unicorns anymore, and I know that King Haggard has never seen one. How could any man who had looked upon a unicorn even once, let alone thousands with every tide, possibly be as sad as King Haggard is? Why, if I had only seen her once and never again. Now he himself paused in some confusion, for he also felt that the talk was going on to some sorrow from which it could never be called back. Molly's neck and shoulders were listening intently, but if the Lady Amalthea could hear what the two men were saying, she gave no sign. Yet the king has a joy hidden somewhere about his life, Schmendrick pointed out. Have you never seen a trace of it? Truly, never seen its track with his eyes. I have. Think for a moment, Prince Lear. The prince was silent, and they wound further into the foul dark. They could not always tell whether they were climbing or descending, nor sometimes if the passage were bending once again until the gnarly nearness of stone at their shoulders suddenly became the bleak rake of a wall against their faces. There was not the smallest sound of the Red Bull or any glimmer of the wicked light, but when Schmendrick touched his damp face, the smell of the bull came off on his fingers. Prince Lear said, sometimes when he has been on the tower, there's something in his face, not a light exactly, but a clearness. I remember I was little, and he never looked at me. He never looked like that when he looked at me, or at anything else, and I had a dream. He was walking very slowly now, scuffing his feet. I used to have a dream, he said, the same dream over and over, about standing at my window in the middle of the night and seeing the bull, seeing the Red Bull. He did not finish. Seeing the bull driving unicorns into the sea, Schmendrick said. It was no dream. Hagrid has them all now, drifting in and out on the tides for his delight, all but one. The magician drew a deep breath. That one is the Lady Amalthea. Yes, Prince Lear answered him. Yes, I know. Schmendrick stared at him. What do you mean you know? He demanded angrily. How could you possibly know that the Lady Amalthea is a unicorn? She can't have told you because she doesn't remember it herself. Since you took her fancy, she's thought only of being a mortal woman. He knew quite well that the truth was the other way around, but it made no difference to him just then. How do you know? He asked again. Prince Lear stopped walking and turned to face him. It was too dark for Schmendrick to see anything but the cold, milky shining where his wide eyes were. I did not know what she was until now, he said, but I knew the first time I saw her that she was something more than I could see. Unicorn, mermaid, ling, sorceress, gorgon. No name you give her would surprise me or frighten me. I love whom I love. That's a very nice sentiment, Schmendrick said. But when I change her back into her true self so that she may do battle with the Red Bull and free her people. I know whom I love, Prince Lear repeated firmly. You have no power over anything that matters. Before the magician could reply, the Lady Amalthea was standing between them, though neither man had seen or heard her as she came back along the passageway. In the darkness, she gleamed and trembled like running water. She said, I will go no farther. It was to the prince that she spoke, but it was Schmendrick who said, There is no choice. We can only go on one. Molly Grew came nearer, one anxious eye and the pale start of a cheekbone. The magician said again, We can only go on. The Lady Amalthea would not look straight at him. He must not change me, she said to Prince Lear. Do not let him work his magic on me. The bull has no care for human beings. We may walk out past him and get away. It is the unicorn the bull wants. Tell him not to change me into a unicorn. Prince Lear twisted his fingers until they cracked. Schmendrick said, It is true. We might very well escape the Red Bull that way even now as we escaped before. But if we do, there will never be another chance. All the unicorns of the world will remain his prisoners forever except one. She will die. She will grow old and die. Everything dies, she said, still to Prince Lear. It is good that everything dies. I want to die when you die. Do not let him enchant me. Do not let him make me immortal. I am no unicorn, no magical creature. I'm human, and I love you. He answered her, saying gently, I don't know much about enchantments, except how to break them. But I know that even the very greatest wizards are powerless against two who keep to each other. And this one is only poor Schmendrick after all. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of anything. Whatever you have been, you are mine now. I can hold you. She turned to look at the magician at last, and even through the darkness he could feel the terror in her eyes. No, she said. No, we are not strong enough. He will change me, and whatever happens after that, you and I will lose each other. I will not love you when I am a unicorn, and you will love me only because you cannot help it. I will be more beautiful than anything in the world and live forever. Schmendrick began to speak, but the sound of his voice made her cower like a candle flame. I will not have it. I will not have it so. She was looking back and forth from the prince to the magician, holding her voice together like the edges of a wound. She said, If there is left a single moment of love when he changes me, you will know it, for I will let the Red Bull drive me into the sea with the others. Then at least I will be near you. There's no need for all that. Schmendrick spoke lightly, making himself laugh. I doubt I could turn you back if you wished it. Nikos himself never could turn a human being into a unicorn, and you're truly human now. You can love, fear, and forbid things to be what they are and overact. Let it end here then. Let the quest end. Is the world any the worse for losing the unicorns? And would it be any better if they were running free again? One good woman more in the world is worth every single unicorn gone. Let it end. Marry the prince and live happily ever after.
The passageway seemed to be growing lighter, and Schmendrick imagined the Red Bull stealing toward them, grotesquely cautious, setting his hooves down as primly as a heron. The thin glimmer of Molly Gru's cheekbone went out as she turned her face away. "Yes," said the Lady Amalthea, "that is my wish." But at the same moment Prince Lear said, "No." The word escaped him as suddenly as a sneeze, emerging in a questioning squeak, the voice of a silly young man mortally embarrassed by a rich and terrible gift. "No," he repeated, and this time the word told in another voice, a king's voice, not haggard, but a king whose grief was not for what he did not have, but for what he could not give. "My lady," he said, "I am a hero. It is a trade, no more, like weaving or brewing, and like them it has its own tricks and knacks, small arts. There are ways of perceiving witches, and of knowing poison streams. There are certain weak spots that all dragons have, and certain riddles that hooded strangers tend to set you. But the true secret of being a hero lies in knowing the order of things. The swineherd cannot already be wed to the princess when he embarks on his adventures, nor can the boy knock at the witch's door when she is away on vacation. The wicked uncle cannot be found out and foiled before he does something wicked. Things must happen when it is time for them to happen. Quests may not simply be abandoned. Prophecies may not be left to rot like unpicked fruit. Unicorns may go unrescued for a long time, but not forever. The happy ending cannot come in the middle of the story." The Lady Amalthea did not answer him. Schmendrick asked, "Why not? Who says so?" "Heroes," Prince Lear replied sadly. "Heroes know about order, about happy endings. Heroes know that some things are better than others. Carpenters know grains and shingles, and straight lines." He put his hands out to the Lady Amalthea and took one step toward her. She did not draw back from him nor turn her face. Indeed, she lifted her head higher, and it was the prince who looked away. "You were the one who taught me," he said. "I never looked at you without seeing the sweetness of the way the world goes together or without sorrow for its spoiling. I became a hero to serve you and all that is like you, also to find some way of starting a conversation." But the Lady Amalthea spoke no word to him. Pale as lime, the brightness was rising in the cavern. They could see one another clearly now, each gone tallowy and strange with fear. Even the beauty of the Lady Amalthea drained away under that dull, hungry light. She looked more mortal than any of the other three. "The bull is coming," Prince Lear said. He turned and set off down the passageway, taking the bold, eager strides of a hero. The Lady Amalthea followed him, walking as lightly and proudly as princesses are taught to try to walk. Molly Gru stayed close to the magician, taking his hand as she had been used to touch the unicorn when she was lonely. He smiled down at her, looking quite pleased with himself. Molly said, "Let her stay the way she is. Let her be." "Tell that to Lear," he replied cheerfully. "Was it I who said that order is all? Was it I who said that she must challenge the Red Bull because it would be more proper and precise that way? I have no concern for regulated rescues and official happy endings."
That's Lear. But you made him do it, she said. You know that all he wants in the world is to have her give up her quest and stay with him. And she would have done it. But you reminded him that he is a hero. And now he has to go do what heroes do. He loves her. And you tricked him. I never, Schmendrick said. Be quiet, he'll hear you. Molly felt herself growing light-headed, silly with the nearness of the bull. The light and the smell had become a sticky sea in which she floundered like the unicorns, hopeless and eternal. The path was beginning to tilt downward into the deepening light, and far ahead, Prince Lear and the Lady Amalthea went marching along to disaster as calmly as candles burning down. Molly Grew snickered. She went on, I know why you did it too. You can't become mortal yourself until you change your back again, isn't that it? You don't care what happens to her or to the others, just as long as you become a real magician at last. Isn't that it? Well, you'll never be a real magician, even if you change the bull into a bullfrog, because it's still just a trick when you do it. You don't care about anything but magic, and what kind of magician is that? Schmendrick, I don't feel good. I have to sit down. Schmendrick must have carried her for a time because she was definitely not walking, and his green eyes were ringing in her head. That's right. Nothing but magic matters to me. I would round up unicorns for Hagrid myself if it would heighten my power by half a hair. It's true. I have no preferences and no loyalties. I have only magic. His voice was hard and sad. Really? She asked, rocking dreamily in her terror, watching the brightness flowing by. That's awful. She was very impressed. Are you really like that? No, he said, then or later. No, it's not true. How could I be like that and still have all these troubles? Then he said, Molly, you have to walk now. He's there. He's there. Molly saw the horns first. The light made her cover her face, but the pale horns struck bitterly through hands and eyelids to the back of the mind. She saw Prince Lear and the Lady Amalthea standing before the horns, while the fire flourished on the walls of the cavern and soared up into the roofless dark. Prince Lear had drawn his sword, but it blazed up in his hand, and he let it fall, and it broke like ice. The Red Bull stamped his foot, and everyone fell down. Schmendrick had thought to find the bull waiting in his lair or in some wide place with room enough to do battle, but he had come silently up the passageway to meet them, and now he stood across their sight, not only from one burning wall to the other, but somehow in the walls themselves, and beyond them, bending away forever. Yet he was no mirage, but the Red Bull still, steaming and snuffling, shaking his blind head. His jaws champed over his breath with a terrible wallowing sound. Now is the time, whether I work ruin or great good. This is the end of it. The magician rose slowly to his feet, ignoring the bull, listening only to his cupped self, as to a seashell. But no power stirred or spoke in him. He could hear nothing but the far, thin howling of emptiness against his ear, as old King Hagrid must have heard it waking and sleeping, and never another sound. It will not come to me. Nikos was wrong. I am what I see. The Lady Amalthea had stepped back a pace from the bull, but no more, and she was regarding him quietly as he pawed with his front feet and snorted great rumbling, rainy blasts out of his vast nostrils. He seemed puzzled about her and almost foolish. He did not roar. The Lady Amalthea stood in this freezing light with her head tipped back to see all of them. Without turning her head, she put her hand out to find Prince Lear's hand. Good, good. There's nothing I can do, and I'm glad of it. The bull will let her by, and she'll go away with Lear. It's as right as anything. I'm only sorry about the unicorns. The prince had not yet noticed her offered hand, but in a moment he would turn and see and touch her for the first time. He will never know what she has given him, but neither will she.
The Red Bull lowered his head and charged. He came without warning, with no sound but the rip of his hooves, and if he had chosen, he could have crushed all four of them in that one silent onslaught. But he let them scatter before him and flatten themselves into the wrinkled walls, and he went by without harming them, though he might easily have horned them out of their shallow shelters like so many periwinkles. Supple as fire, he turned where there was no room to turn and met them again, his muzzle almost touching the ground, his neck swelling like a wave. It was then that he roared. They fled and he followed, not as swiftly as he had charged, but quickly enough to keep each one alone, friendless in the wild dark. The ground tore under their feet and they cried out, but they could not even hear themselves. Every bellow of the Red Bull brought great slides of stones and earth shuddering down on them, and still they scrambled along like broken insects, and still he came after them. Through his mad blaring they heard another sound, the deep whine of the castle itself as it strained at its roots, drumming like a flag in the wind of his wrath. And very faintly there drifted up the passageway the smell of the sea. He knows, he knows. I fooled him once that way, but not again. Woman or unicorn, he will hunt her into the sea this time, as he was bidden, and no magic of mine will turn him from it. Hagrid has won. So the magician thought as he ran, all hope gone for the first time in his long, strange life. The way widened suddenly, and they emerged into a kind of grotto that could only have been the bull's den. The stench of his sleeping hung so thick and old here that it had a loathly sweetness about it, and the cave brooded gullet red as though his light had rubbed off on the walls and crusted in the cracks and crevices. Beyond lay the tunnel again and the dim gleam of breaking water. The Lady Amalthea fell as irrevocably as a flower breaks. Schmendrick leaped to one side, wheeling to drag Molly Grew with him. They brought up hard against a split slab of rock, and there they crouched together as the Red Bull raged by without turning. But he came to a halt between one stride and the next, and the sudden stillness, broken only by the bull's breathing and the distant grinding of the sea, would have been absurd but for the cause of it. She lay on her side with one leg bent beneath her. She moved slowly, but she made no sound. Prince Lear stood between her body and the bull, weaponless, but with his hands up as though they still held a sword and shield. Once more in that endless night, the prince said, "No." He looked very foolish, and he was about to be trampled flat. The Red Bull could not see him and would kill him without ever knowing that he had been in the way. Wonder and love and great sorrow shook Schmendrick the magician then, and came together inside him, and filled him until he felt himself brimming and flowing with something that was none of these. He did not believe it, but it came to him anyway, as it had touched him twice before, and left him more barren than he had been. This time there was too much of it for him to hold. It spilled through his skin, sprang from his fingers and toes, welled up equally in his eyes and his hair, and the hollows of his shoulders. There was too much to hold, and too much ever to use, and still he found himself weeping with the pain of his impossible greed. He thought, or said, or sang, "I did not know that I was so empty, to be so full." The Lady Amalthea lay where she had fallen, though now she was trying to rise, and Prince Lear still guarded her, raising his naked hands against the enormous shape that loomed over him. The tip of the prince's tongue stuck out of one corner of his mouth, making him look as serious as a child taking something apart. Long years later, when Schmendrick's name had become a greater name than Nikos's and worse than Afrit's,
surrendered at the sound of it. He was never able to work the smallest magic without seeing Prince Lear before him, his eyes squinted up because of the brightness, and his tongue sticking out. The Red Bull stamped again, and Prince Lear fell on his face and got up bleeding. The bull's rumble began, and the blind, bloated head started down, lowering like one half of the scales of doom. Lear's valiant heart hung between the pale horns, as good as dripping from their tips, himself as good as smashed and scattered, and his mouth buckled a little, but he never moved. The sound of the bull grew louder as the horns went down. Then Schmendrick stepped into the open and said a few words. They were short words, undistinguished either by melody or harshness, and Schmendrick himself could not hear them for the Red Bull's dreadful bawling. But he knew what they meant, and he knew exactly how to say them, and he knew that he could say them again when he wanted to, in the same way or in a different way. Now he spoke them gently and with joy. As he did so, he felt his immortality fall from him like armor, or like a shroud. At the first word of the spell, the Lady Amalthea gave a thin, bitter cry. She reached out again to Prince Lear, but he had his back to her, protecting her, and he did not hear. Molly grew heartsick, caught at Schmendrick's arm, but the magician spoke on. Yet even when the wonder blossomed where she had been, sea white, as boundlessly beautiful as the bull was mighty, still the Lady Amalthea clung to herself for a moment more. She was no longer there, and yet her face hovered like a breath in the cold, reeky light. It would have been better if Prince Lear had not turned until she was gone. But he turned. He saw the unicorn, and she shone in him as in a glass. But it was to the other that he called, to the castaway, to the Lady Amalthea. His voice was the end of her. She vanished when he cried her name as though he had crowed for day. Things happen both swiftly and slowly as they do in dreams, where it is really the same thing. The unicorn stood very still, looking at them all out of lost, elsewhere eyes. She seemed even more beautiful than Schmendrick remembered, for no one can keep a unicorn in his head for long, and yet she was not as she had been, no more than he was. Molly Grew started toward her, speaking softly and foolishly, but the unicorn gave no sign that she knew her. The marvelous horn remained dull as rain. With a roar that set the walls of his lair belling out and cracking like circus canvas, the Red Bull charged for the second time. The unicorn fled across the cave and into darkness. Prince Lear, in turning, had stepped a little to one side, and before he could wheel back again, the bull's plunging pursuit smashed him down, stunned with his mouth open. Molly would have gone to him, but Schmendrick took hold of her and dragged her along after the bull and the unicorn. Neither beast was in sight, but the tunnel still thundered from their desperate passage. Dazed and bewildered, Molly stumbled beside the fierce stranger who would neither let her fall nor slacken her pace. Over her head and all around she could feel the castle groaning, creaking in the rock like a loosening tooth. The witch's rhyme jangled in her memory over and over. Yet none but one of Hagsgate town may bring the castle swirling down. Suddenly it was sand slowing their feet, and the smell of the sea, cold as the other smell, but so good, so friendly that they both stopped running and laughed aloud. Above them, on the cliff, King Hagrid's castle splayed up toward a gray-green morning sky, splashed with thin, milky clouds. Molly was sure that the king himself must be watching from one of the tremulous towers, but she could not see him. A few stars still fluttered in the heavy blue sky over the water. The tide was out, and the bald beach had the gray, wet gleam of a stripped shellfish. But far down the strand, the sea was bending like a bow, and Molly knew that the ebb had ended. The unicorn and the Red Bull stood facing each other at the arch of the bow, and the unicorn's back was to the sea. The bull moved in slowly, not charging, but pressing her almost gently toward the water, never touching her.
She did not resist him. Her horn was dark and her head was down, and the bull was as much her master as he had been on the plain of Hagsgate, before she became the Lady Amalthea. It might have been that same hopeless dawn except for the sea. Yet she was not altogether beaten. She backed away until one hind foot actually stepped into the water. At that, she sprang through the sullen smolder of the Red Bull and ran away along the beach, so swift and light that the wind of her passing blew her footprints off the sand. The bull went after her. "Do something," a hoarse voice said to Schmendrick, as Molly had said it long ago. Prince Lear stood behind him, his face bloody and his eyes mad. He looked like King Haggard. "Do something," he said. "You have power. You changed her into a unicorn. Do something now to save her. I will kill you if you don't." He showed the magician his hands. "I cannot," Schmendrick answered him quietly. "Not all the magic in the world can help her now. If she will not fight him, she must go into the sea with the others. Neither magic nor murder will help her." Molly heard small waves slapping on the sand. The tide was beginning to turn. She saw no unicorns tumbling in the water, though she looked for them, willing them to be there. What if it was too late? What if they drifted out on the last ebb tide, out to the deepest sea where no ships go, because of the kraken and the sea drake, and because of the floating jungles of wrack that tangle and drown even these? She would never find them then. Would she stay with me? "Then what is magic for?" Prince Lear demanded wildly. "What use is wizardry if it cannot save a unicorn?" He gripped the magician's shoulder hard to keep from falling. Schmendrick did not turn his head. With a touch of sad mockery in his voice, he said, "That's what heroes are for." They could not see the unicorn for the hugeness of the bull, but suddenly she doubled on her track and came flying up the beach toward them. Blind and patient as the sea, the Red Bull followed her, his hooves gouging great ditches in the damp sand. Smoke and fire, spray and storm. They came on together, neither one gaining, and Prince Lear gave a soft grunt of understanding. "Yes, of course," he said. "That is exactly what heroes are for. Wizards make no difference, so they say that nothing does, but heroes are meant to die for unicorns." He let go of Schmendrick's shoulder, smiling to himself. "There's a basic fallacy in your reasoning," Schmendrick began indignantly, but the prince never heard what it was. The unicorn flashed by them, her breath streaming blue-white and her head carried too high, and Prince Lear leaped into the path of the Red Bull. For a moment he disappeared entirely, like a feather in a flame. The bull ran over him and left him lying on the ground. One side of his face cuddled too hard into the sand, and one leg kicked the air 3 times before it stopped. He fell without a cry, and Schmendrick and Molly alike were stricken as silent as he. But the unicorn turned. The Red Bull halted when she did, and wheeled to put her once more between himself and the sea. He began his mincing, dancing advance again, but he might have been a courting bird for all the attention the unicorn paid him. She stood motionless, staring at the twisted body of Prince Lear. The tide was grumbling in hard now, and the beach was already a slice narrower. Whitecaps and skippers' daughters spilled up into the sprawling dawn, but Molly Grew still saw no other unicorn but her own. Over the castle the sky was scarlet, and on the highest tower King Haggard stood up as clear and black as a winter tree. Molly could see the straight scar of his mouth, and his nails darkening as he gripped the parapet. But the castle cannot fall now. Only Lear could have made it fall. Suddenly the unicorn screamed. It was not at all like the challenging bell with which she had first met the Red Bull. It was an ugly, squawking, wail of sorrow and loss and rage, such as no immortal creature ever gave. The castle quaked, and King Haggard shrank back with one arm across his face. The Red Bull hesitated, shuffling in the sand, lowing doubtfully. The unicorn cried out again and reared up like a scimitar. The street sweep of her body made Molly close her eyes, but she opened them again in time to see the unicorn leap at the Red Bull, and the bull swerve out of her way. The unicorn's horn was light again, burning and shivering like a butterfly. Again she charged, and again the bull gave ground, heavy with perplexity but still quick as a fish. His own horns were the color and likeness of lightning, and the slightest swing of his head made her stagger, but he retreated and retreated, backing steadily down the beach as she had done. She lunged after him, driving to kill, but she could not reach him. She might have been stabbing at a shadow or at a memory. So the Red Bull fell back without giving battle until she had stalked him to the water's edge. There he made his stand, with the surf swirling about his hooves, and the sand rushing away under them. He would neither fight nor fly, and she knew now that she could never destroy him. Still, she set herself for another charge, while he muttered wonderingly in his throat. For Molly Grew, the world hung motionless in that glass moment. As though she was standing on a higher tower than King Haggard's, she looked down on a pale paring of land where a toy man and woman stared with their knitted eyes at a clay bowl and a tiny ivory unicorn, abandoned playthings. There was another doll, too, half buried, and a sandcastle with a stick king propped up in one tilted turret. The tide would take it all in a moment, and nothing would be left but the flaccid birds of the beach, hopping in circles. Then Schmendrick shook her back to his side, saying, "Molly." Far out to sea the combers were coming in, the long, heavy rollers, curling over white across their green hearts, tearing themselves to smoke on the sandbars and the slimy rocks, rasping up the beach with a sound like fire. The birds flew up in yelling clumps, their strident outrage lost in the cry of the waves like pins. And in the whiteness, of the whiteness, flowering in the tattered water, their bodies arching with the streaked marble hollows of the waves, their manes and tails and the fragile beards of the males burning in the sunlight, their eyes as dark and jeweled as the deep sea, and the shining of the horns, the seashell shining of the horns. The horns came riding in like the rainbow masts of silver ships. But they would not come to land while the bull was there. They rode in the shadows, swirling together as madly as frightened fish when the nets are being hauled up, no longer with the sea, but losing it. Hundreds were borne in with each swell and hurled against the ones already struggling to keep from being shoved ashore. And they in their turn struck out desperately, rearing and stumbling, stretching their long, cloudy necks far back. The unicorn lowered her head one last time and hurled herself at the Red Bull. There's an image here. If he had been either true flesh or a windy ghost, the blow would have burst him like rotting fruit. But he turned away, unnoticing, and walked slowly into the sea. The unicorns in the water floundered wildly to let him by, stamping and slashing the surf into a roiling mist which their horns turned rainbow. But on the beach and atop the cliff,
and up and down through all of Haggard's kingdom, the land sighed when his weight had passed from it. He strode out a long way before he began to swim. The hugest waves broke no higher than his hocks, and the timid tide ran away from him. But when at last he let himself sink onto the flood, then a great surge of the sea stood up behind him, a green and black swell, as deep and smooth and hard as the wind. It gathered in silence, folding from one horizon to the other, until for a moment it actually hid the Red Bull's humped shoulders and sloping back. Schmendrick lifted the dead prince, and he and Molly ran until the cliff face stopped them. The wave fell like a cloudburst of chains. Then the unicorns came out of the sea. Molly never saw them clearly. They were a light leaping toward her and a cry that dazzled her eyes. She was wise enough to know that no mortal was ever meant to see all the unicorns in the world, and she tried to find her own unicorn and look only at her. But there were too many of them, and they were too beautiful. Blind as the bull, she moved to meet them, holding out her arms. The unicorns would surely have run her down as the Red Bull had trampled Prince Lear, for they were mad with freedom. But Schmendrick spoke, and they streamed to the right and left of Molly and Lear and himself, some even springing over them, as the sea shatters on a rock and then comes whirling together again. All around Molly there flowed and flowered a light as impossible as snow set afire, while thousands of cloven hooves sang by like cymbals. She stood very still, neither weeping nor laughing, for her joy was too great for her body to understand. "Look up," Schmendrick said. "The castle is falling." She turned and saw that the towers were melting as the unicorns sprang up the cliff and flowed around them, exactly as though they had been made out of sand and the sea were sliding in. The castle came down in great cold chunks that turned thin and waxen as they swirled in the air until they disappeared. It crumbled and vanished without a sound, and it left no ruins either, on land or in the memories of the two who watched it fall. A minute later, they could not remember where it had stood or how it had looked. But King Haggard, who was quite real, fell down through the wreckage of his disenchanted castle, like a knife dropped through the clouds. Molly heard him laugh once, as though he had expected it. Very little ever surprised King Haggard. Chapter 14. Once the sea had taken back their diamond-shaped footprints, there was no sign that they had ever been there, any more than King Haggard's castle had been. The only difference was that Molly Grew remembered unicorns very well. "It's good that she went without saying goodbye," she said to herself. "I would have been stupid. I'm going to be stupid in a minute anyway. But it really is better like this." Then a warmth moved over her cheek and into her hair, like sunlight, and she turned and put her arms around the unicorn's neck. "Oh, you stayed," she whispered. "You stayed." She was about to be very foolish then and ask, "Will you stay?" But the unicorn slipped gently from her and moved to where Prince Lear lay, with his dark blue eyes already losing their color. She stood over him as he had guarded the Lady Amalthea. "She can restore him," Schmendrick said softly. "A unicorn's horn is proof against death itself." Molly looked closely at him, as she had not done for a long time, and she saw that he had come at last to his power and his beginning. She could not say how she knew, for no wild glory burned about him, and no recognizable omens occurred in his honor just at that moment. He wished Mendrick the magician as ever, and yet somehow it was for the first time. It was long that the unicorn stood by Prince Lear before she touched him with her horn. For all that her quest had ended joyously, there was weariness in the way she held herself, and a sadness in her beauty that Molly had never seen. It suddenly seemed to her that the unicorn's sorrow was not for Lear, but for the lost girl who could not be brought back, for the Lady Amalthea, who might have lived happily ever after with the prince. The unicorn bowed her head, and her horn glanced across Lear's chin as clumsily as a first kiss. He sat up blinking, smiling at something long ago. "Father," he said in a quick, wondering voice, "Father, I had a dream." Then he saw the unicorn and rose to his feet as the blood on his face began to shine and move again. He said, "I was dead." The unicorn touched him a second time, over the heart, letting her horn rest there for a little space. They were both trembling. Prince Lear put his hands out to her like words. She said, "I remember you. I remember." "When I was dead," Prince Lear began, but she was away. Not a stone rattled down after her, not a bush tore out as she sprang up the cliff. She went as lightly as the shadow of a bird, and when she looked back, with one cloven foot poised, and the sunlight on her sides, with her head and neck absurdly fragile for the burden of the horn. Then each of the three below called out to her in pain. She turned and vanished, but Molly Grew saw their voices thump home into her like arrows. And even more than she wished the unicorn back, she wished that she had not called. Prince Lear said, "As soon as I saw her, I knew that I had been dead. It was so the other time, when I looked down from my father's tower and saw her." He glanced up then and drew in his breath. It was the only sound of grief for King Haggard that any living thing ever made. "Was it I?" he whispered. "The curse said that I would be the one to bring the castle down. But I would never have done it. He was not good to me, but it was only because I was not what he wanted. Is it my doing that he has fallen?" Schmendrick replied, "If you had not tried to save the unicorn, she would never have turned on the Red Bull and driven him into the sea. It was the Red Bull who made the overflow, and so set the other unicorns free, and it was they who destroyed the castle. Would you have it otherwise, knowing this?" Prince Lear shook his head, but he said nothing. Molly asked, "But why did the bull run from her? Why didn't he stand and fight?" There was no sign of him when they looked out to sea, though he was surely too vast to have swum out of sight in so short a time. But whether he reached some other shore, or whether the water drew even his great bulk down at last, none of them knew until long after, and he was never seen again in that kingdom. "The Red Bull never fights," Schmendrick said. "He conquers, but he never fights." He turned to Prince Lear and put a hand on his shoulder. "Now you are the king," he said. He touched Molly as well, said something that was more of a whistle than a word, and the three of them floated up the air like milkweed plumes to the top of the cliff. Molly was not frightened. The magic lifted her as gently as though she were a note of music, and it was singing her. She could feel that it was never very far from being wild and dangerous, but she was sorry when it set her down. No stone of the castle remained, nor any scar. The earth was not even a shade paler where it had stood. 4 young men in rusty, ragged armor wandered gaping through the vanished corridors, and turned around and around in the absence that had been the great hall. When they saw Lear, Molly, and Schmendrick, they came running toward them, laughing. They fell on their knees before Lear and cried out together, "Your Majesty! Long live King Lear!" Lear blushed and actually tried to pull them to their feet. "Never mind that," he mumbled. "Never mind that. Who are you?" He peered in amazement from one face to the next. "I know you. I do know you. But how can it be?" "It is true, your Majesty," the first of the young men said happily. "We are indeed King Hagrid's men-at-arms, the same who served him for so many cold and weary years. We fled the castle after you disappeared into the clock, for the Red Bull was roaring and all the towers were trembling and we were afraid. We knew that the old curse must be coming home at last." "A great wave took the castle," said a second man-at-arms, "exactly as the witch foretold. I saw it go spilling down the cliff as slowly as snow. Why we did not go with it, I cannot tell." "The wave parted to go around us," another man said, "as I never saw any wave do. It was strange water, like the ghost of a wave, boiling with a rainbow light, and for a moment it seemed to me—" He rubbed his eyes and shrugged and smiled hopelessly. "I don't know. It was like a dream." "But what has happened to you all?" Lear demanded. "You were old men when I was born, and now you're younger than I am. What miracle is this?" The three who had spoken giggled and looked embarrassed, but the fourth man replied, "It is the miracle of meaning what we said. Once we told the Lady Amalthea that we would grow young again if she wished it so, and we must have been telling her the truth. Where is she? We will go to her. We will go to her aid if it means facing the Red Bull himself." King Lear said, "She is gone. Find my horse and saddle him. Find my horse." His voice was harsh and hungry, and the men-at-arms scrambled to obey their new lord. But Schmendrick, standing behind him, said quietly, "Your Majesty, it must not be. You must not follow her." The king turned, and he looked like Haggard. "Magician, she is mine." He paused, and then went on in a gentler tone, close to pleading. "She has twice raised me up from death, and what will I be without her but dead for a third time?" He took Schmendrick by the wrists with a grip strong enough to powder bones, but the magician did not move. Lear said, "I am not King Haggard. I have no wish to capture her, but only to spend my life following after her, miles, leagues, even years behind, never seeing her perhaps, but content. It is my right. A hero is entitled to his happy ending when it comes at last." But Schmendrick answered, "This is not the end, either for you or for her. You are the king of a wasted land where there has never been any king but fear. Your true task has only just begun, and you may not know in your life if you have succeeded in it, but only if you fail. As for her, she is a story with no ending, happy or sad. She can never belong to anything mortal enough to want her." Most strangely then, he put his arms around the young king and held him so for a time. "Yet be content, my lord," he said in a low voice. "No man has ever had more of her grace than you, and no other will ever be blessed by her remembrance. You have loved her and served her. Be content and be king." "But that is not what I want!" Lear cried. The magician answered not a word, but only looked at him. Blue eyes stared back into green, a face grown lean and lordly into one neither so handsome nor so bold. The king began to squint and blink, as though he were gazing at the sun, and it was not long before he lowered his eyes and muttered, "So be it.
I will stay and rule alone over a wretched people in a land I hate. But I will have no more joy of my rule than poor Haggard ever had. A small autumn cat with a crooked ear stalked out of some secret fold in the air and yawned at Molly. She caught him up against her face, and he tangled his paws in her hair. Schmendrick smiled and said to the king, "We must leave you now. Will you come with us and see us in friendship to the edge of your domain? There is much between here and there that is worth your study, and I can promise you that there will be some sign of unicorns." Then King Lear shouted for his horse again, and his men searched for it and found it, but there were none for Schmendrick and Molly. Yet when they came back with the king's horse, they turned at his amazed stare, and saw two more horses trailing docilely behind them, one black and one brown, and both already saddled and bridled. Schmendrick took the black for himself, and gave the brown horse to Molly. She was afraid of them at first. "Are they yours?" she asked him. "Did you make them? Can you do that now? Just make things?" The king's whisper echoed her wonder. "I found them," the magician answered, "but what I mean by finding is not what you mean. Ask me no more." He lifted her into the saddle, and then leaped up himself. So the three of them rode away, and the men-at-arms followed on foot. No one looked back, for there was nothing to see. But King Lear said once, without turning, "It is strange to have grown to manhood in a place, and then to have it gone, and everything changed, and suddenly to be king. Was none of it real at all? Am I real, then?" Schmendrick made no reply. King Lear wished to go swiftly, but Schmendrick held them to a leisurely pace and a roundabout road. When the king fretted for speed, he was admonished to consider his walking men, though they, marvelously, never tired for all the length of the journey. But Molly soon understood that the magician was delaying in order to make Lear gaze long and closely at his realm, and to her own surprise she discovered that the land was worth the look, for, very slowly, spring was coming to the barren country that had been Haggard's. A stranger would not have noticed the change, but Molly could see that the withered earth was brightening with a greenness as shy as smoke. Squat, snaggly trees that had never yet bloomed were putting forth flowers in the wary way an army sends out scouts. Long dry streams were beginning to rustle in their beds, and small creatures were calling to one another. Smells slipped by in ribbons: pale grass and black mud, honey and walnuts, mint and hay and rotting apple wood, and even the afternoon sunlight had a tender, sneezy scent that Molly would have known anywhere. She rode beside Schmendrick, watching the gentle advent of the spring and thinking of how it had come to her. Late, but lasting. "Unicorns have passed here," she whispered to the magician. "Is that the cause? Or is it Hagrid's fall and the Red Bull's going? What is it? What is happening?" "Everything," he answered her. "Everything all at once. It is not one springtime, but 50, and not one or two great terrors flown away, but 1,000 small shadows lifted from the land. Wait and see." Speaking for Lear's ear, he added, "Nor is this the first spring that ever has been in this country. It was a good land, long ago, and it wants little but a true king to be so again. See how it softens before you." King Lear said nothing, but his eyes roved left and right as he rode, and he could not but observe the ripening. Even the valley of Hagsgate, of evil memory, was stirring with all manner of wild flowers: columbine and harebell, lavender and lupine, foxglove and yarrow. The rutted footprints of the Red Bull were growing mellow with mallow. But when they came to Hagsgate, deep in the afternoon, a strange and savage sight awaited them. The ploughed fields were woefully torn and ravaged, while the rich orchards and vineyards had been stamped down.
leaving no grove or arbor standing. It was such shattering ruin as the bull himself might have wrought, but it seemed to Molly Grew as though 50 years' worth of foiled griefs had struck Hagsgate all at once, just as that many springtimes were at last warming the rest of the land. The trampled earth looked oddly ashen in the late night. King Lear said quietly, "What is this?" "Ride on, your majesty," the magician replied. "Ride on." The sun was setting as they passed through the overthrown gates of the town, and guided their horses slowly down streets that were choked with boards and belongings and broken glass, with pieces of walls and windows, chimneys, chairs, kitchenware, roofs, bathtubs, beds, mantels, dressing tables. Every house in Hagsgate was down. Everything that could be broken was. The town looked as though it had been stepped on. The people of Hagsgate sat at their doorsteps, wherever they could find them, considering the wreckage. They had always had the air of paupers, even in the midst of plenty, and real ruin made them appear almost relieved, and no whit poorer. They hardly noticed Lear when he rode up to them until he said, "I am the king. What has befallen you here?" "There was an earthquake," one man murmured dreamily, but another contradicted him, saying, "It was a storm, a nor'easter straight off the sea. Shook the town to bits, and hail came down like hooves." Still another man insisted that a mighty tide had washed over Hagsgate, a tide as white as dogwood and heavy as marble, that drowned none and smashed everything. King Lear listened to them all, smiling grimly. "Listen," he said when they were done. "King Haggard is dead, and his castle has fallen. I am Lear, the son of Hagsgate, who was abandoned at birth in order to keep the witch's curse from coming true, and this from happening." He swept an arm around him at the burst houses. "Wretched, silly people, the unicorns have returned. The unicorns that you saw the Red Bull hunting and pretended not to see. It was they who brought the castle down and the town as well. But it is your greed and your fear that have destroyed you." The townsfolk sighed in resignation, but a middle-aged woman stepped forward and said with some spirit, "It all seems a bit unfair, my lord. Begging your pardon. What could we have done to save the unicorns? We were afraid of the Red Bull. What could we have done?" "One word might have been enough," King Lear replied. "You'll never know now." He would have wheeled his horse and left them there, but a feeble, rupee voice called to him, "Lear, Lear, little Lear, my child, my king." Molly and Schmendrick recognized the man who came shuffling up with his arms open, wheezing and limping as though he were older than he truly was. It was Drin. "Who are you?" the king demanded. "What do you want of me?" Drin pawed at his stirrups, nuzzling his boots. "You don't know me, my boy." "No, how should you? How should I deserve to have you know me? I am your father, your poor old overjoyed father. I am the one who left you in the marketplace on that winter night long ago and handed you over to your heroic destiny. How wise I was, and how sad for so long, and how proud I am now. My boy, my little boy." He could not quite cry real tears, but his nose was running. Without a word, King Lear tugged at the horse's reins, backing him out of the crowd. Old Drin let his outstretched arms drop to his sides. "This is what it is to have children," he screeched. "Ungrateful son, will you desert your father in the hour of his distress, when a word from your pet wizard would have set everything right again? Despise me if you will, but I have played my part in putting you where you are, and you dare not deny it. Villainy has its rights too." Still, the king would have turned away, but Schmendrick touched his arm and leaned near. "It's true, you know.
he whispered. But for him, but for them all, the tale would have worked out quite another way, and who can say that the ending would have been even as happy as this? You must be their king, and you must rule them as kindly as you would a braver and more faithful folk, for they are a part of your fate. Then Lear lifted his head to the people of Hagsgate, and they pushed and elbowed one another for silence. He said, I must ride with my friends, and keep them company for a way, but I will leave my men-at-arms here, and they will help you begin to build your town again. When I return, in a little time, I also will help. I will not begin to build my new castle until I see Hagsgate standing once more. They complained bitterly that Schmendrick could do it all in a moment by means of his magic, but he answered them, I could not, even if I would. There are laws that govern the wizard's art, as laws command the seasons and the sea. Magic made you wealthy once, when all others in the land were poor, but your days of prosperity are ended, and now you must start over. What was wasteland in Haggard's name shall grow green and generous again, but Hagsgate will yield a living exactly as miserly as the hearts that dwell here. You may plant your acres again, and raise up your fallen orchards and vineyards, but they will never flourish as they used to. Never. Until you learn to take joy in them for no reason. He gazed on the silent townsfolk with no anger in his glance, but only pity. If I were you, I would have children, he said, and then to King Lear, how says your majesty? Shall we sleep here tonight and be on our way at dawn? But the king turned and rode away out of ruined Hagsgate as fast as he could spur. It was long before Molly and the magician came up with him, and longer still before they lay down to sleep. For many days they journeyed through King Lear's domain, and each day they knew it less and delighted in it more. The spring ran on before them as swiftly as fire, clothing all that was naked and opening everything that had long ago shut up tight, touching the earth as the unicorn had touched Lear. Every sort of animal, from bears to black beetles, came sporting or shambling or scurrying along their way, and the high sky that had been as sandy and arid as the soil itself now blossomed with birds, swirling so thickly that it seemed like sunset most of the day. Fish bent and flickered in the whisking streams, and wild flowers raced up and down the hills like escaped prisoners. All the land was noisy with life, but it was the silent rejoicing of the flowers that kept the three travelers awake at night. The folk of the villages greeted them cautiously and with little less dourness than they had shown when Schmendrick and Molly first came that way. Only the oldest among them had ever seen the spring before, and many suspected the rampaging greenness of being a plague or invasion. King Lear told them that Haggard was dead and the Red Bull gone forever, invited them to visit him when his new castle was raised, and passed on. They will need time to feel comfortable with flowers, he said. Wherever they stopped, he left word that all outlaws were pardoned, and Molly hoped that the news would come to Captain Cully and his merry band. As it happened, it did, and all the merry band immediately abandoned the life of the greenwood, saving only Cully himself and Jack Jingley. Together they took up the trade of wandering minstrels and were reported to have become reasonably popular in the provinces. One night the three slept at the farthest frontier of Lear's kingdom, making their beds in high grass. The king would bid them farewell in the morning and return to Hagsgate. It will be lonely, he said in the darkness. I would rather go with you and not be king. Oh, you'll get to like it, Schmendrick replied. The best young men of the villages will make their way to your court, and you'll teach them to be knights and heroes. The wisest of ministers will come to counsel you. The most skillful musicians and jugglers and storytellers will come seeking your favor. And there'll be a princess in time, either fleeing her unspeakably wicked father and brothers, or seeking justice for them. Perhaps you will hear of her, shut away in a fortress of flint and adamant, her only companion a compassionate spider. I don't care for that, King Lear said.
He was silent for so long that Schmendrick thought he had fallen asleep, but presently he said, I wish I could see her once more, to tell her all my heart. She will never know what I really meant to say. You did promise that I would see her. The magician answered him sharply, I promised only that you would see some sign of unicorns, and so you have. Your realm is blessed beyond any lands deserving, because they have passed across it in freedom. As for you and your heart, and the things you said and didn't say, she will remember them all when men are fairy tales and books written by rabbits. Think of that, and be still. The king spoke no more after that, and Schmendrick repented of his words. She touched you twice, he said in a little while. The first touch was to bring you to life again, but the second was for you. Lear did not answer, and the magician never knew if he had heard or not. Schmendrick dreamed that the unicorn came and stood by him at sunrise. The thin night wind lifted and spilled her mane, and the moon shone on the snowflake crafting of her small head. He knew it was a dream, but he was happy to see her. How beautiful you are, he said. I never really told you. He would have roused the others, but her eyes sang him a warning as clearly as two frightened birds, and he knew that if he moved to call Molly and Lear, he would wake himself, and she would vanish. So he said only, They love you more, I think, though I do the best I can. That is why, she said, and he could not tell what she was answering. He lay very still, hoping that he would remember the exact shape of her ears when he did wake in the morning. She said, You are a true and mortal wizard now, as you always wished. Does it make you happy? Yes, he replied with a quiet laugh. I'm not poor haggard, to lose my heart's desire in the having of it. But there are wizards and wizards. There is black magic and white magic, and the infinite shades of gray between. And I see now that it is all the same. Whether I decide to be what men would call a wise and good magician, aiding heroes, thwarting witches, wicked lords and unreasonable parents, making rain, curing wool sorters' disease, and the mad staggers, getting cats down from trees, or whether I choose the retorts full of elixirs and essences, the powders and herbs and banes, the padlocked books of grammari, bound in skins better left unnamed, the muddy mist darkening in the chamber, and the sweet voice lisping therein. Why, life is short, and how many can I help or harm? I have my power at last, but the world is still too heavy for me to move, though my friend Lear might think otherwise. And he laughed again in his dream, a little sadly. The unicorn said, That is true. You are a man, and men can do nothing that makes any difference. But her voice was strangely slow and burdened. She asked, Which will you choose? The magician laughed for a third time. Oh, it will be the kind magic, undoubtedly, because you would like it more. I do not think I'll ever see you again, but I will try to do what would please you if you knew. And you, where will you be for the rest of my life? I thought you would have gone home to your forest by now. She turned a little away from him, and the sudden starlight of her shoulders made all his talk of magic taste like sand in his throat. Moths and midges and other night insects too small to be anything in particular came and danced slowly around her bright horn, and this did not make her appear foolish, but them most wise and lovely as they celebrated her. Molly's cat rubbed in and out between her forefeet. The others have gone, she said. They are scattered to the woods they came from, no two together, and men will not catch sight of them much more easily than if they were still in the sea. I will go back to my forest too,
but I do not know if I will live contentedly there or anywhere. I have been mortal, and some part of me is mortal yet. I am full of tears and hunger and the fear of death, though I cannot weep, and I want nothing, and I cannot die. I am not like the others now, for no unicorn was ever born who could regret. But I do. I regret. Schmendrick hid his face like a child, though he was a great magician. I am sorry. I am so sorry. He mumbled into his wrist. I have done you evil, as Nikos did to the other unicorn, with the same goodwill, and I can no more undo it than he could. Mommy Fortuna and King Haggard and the Red Bull together were kinder to you than I. But she answered him gently, saying, My people are in the world again. No sorrow will live in me as long as that joy. Save one, and I thank you for that one too. Farewell, good magician. I will try to go home. She made no sound when she left him, but he was awake, and the crook-eared cat was meowing lonesomely. Turning his head, he saw the moonlight trembling in the open eyes of King Lear and Molly Grew. The three of them lay awake till morning, and nobody said a word. At dawn, King Lear rose up and saddled his horse. Before he mounted, he said to Schmendrick and Molly, I would like it if you would come to see me one day. They assured him that they would, but still he lingered with them, twisting the dangling reins about his fingers. I dreamed about her last night, he said. Molly cried, So did I! And Schmendrick opened his mouth and then closed it again. King Lear said hoarsely, By our friendship, I beg you, tell me what she said to you. His hands gripped one hand each of theirs, and his clutch was cold and painful. Schmendrick gave him a weak smile. My lord, I so rarely remember my dreams. It seems to me that we spoke solemnly of silly things, as one does. Grave nonsense, empty and evanescent. The king let go of his hand and turned his half-mad gaze on Molly Grew. I'll never tell, she said, a little frightened, but flushing oddly. I remember, but I'll never tell anyone, if I die for it. Not even you, my lord. She was not looking at him as she spoke, but at Schmendrick. King Lear let her hand fall as well, and he swung himself into the saddle so fiercely that his horse reared up across the sunrise, bugling like a stag. But Lear kept his seat and glared down at Molly and Schmendrick with a face so grim and scored and sunken that he might as well have been king as long as Haggard before him. She said nothing to me, he whispered. Do you understand? She said nothing to me. Nothing at all. Then his face softened, as even King Haggard's face had gone a little gentle when he watched the unicorns in the sea. For that moment he was again the young prince who had liked to sit with Molly in the scullery. He said, She looked at me. In my dream, she looked at me, and never spoke. He rode away without goodbye, and they watched after him until the hills hid him, a straight, sad horseman going home to be king. Molly said at last, Oh, the poor man. Poor Lear. He has not fared so badly, the magician answered. Great heroes need great sorrows and burdens, or half their greatness goes unnoticed. It's all part of the fairy tale. But his voice was a little doubtful, and he laid his arm softly around Molly's shoulders. It cannot be an ill fortune to have loved a unicorn, he said. Surely it must be the dearest luck of all, though the hardest earned. By and by he put her as far from him as his fingers' ends, and asked her, Now, will you tell me what it was she said to you? But Molly Grew only laughed and shook her head till her hair came down, and she was more beautiful than the Lady Amathea. The magician said, Very well, then I'll find the unicorn again, and perhaps she'll tell me.
and he turned calmly to whistle up their steeds. She said no word while he saddled his horse, but when he began on her own, she put her hand on his arm. Do you truly hope we may find her? There was something I forgot to say. Schmendrick looked at her over his shoulder. The morning sunlight made his eyes seem gay as grass, but now and then, when he stooped into the horse's shadow, there stirred a deeper greenness in his gaze, the green of pine needles that has a faint, cool bitterness about it. He said, I fear it, for her sake. It would mean that she too is a wanderer now, and that is a fate for human beings, not for unicorns. But I hope, of course I hope. Then he smiled at Molly and took her hand in his. Anyway, since you and I must choose one road to follow, out of the many that run to the same place in the end, it might as well be a road that a unicorn has taken. We may never see her, but we'll always know where she's been. Come then, come with me. So they began their new journey, which took them, in its time, in and out of most of the folds of the sweet, wicked, wrinkled world, and so at last to their own strange and wonderful destiny. But that was all later, and first, not 10 minutes out of Lear's kingdom, they met a maiden who came hurrying toward them on foot. Her dress was torn and smirched, but the richness of its making was still plain to see, and though her hair was tumbled and brambled, her arms scratched, and her fair face dirty, there was no mistaking her for anyone but a princess in woeful distress. Schmendrick lighted down to support her, and she clutched him with both hands as though he were a grapefruit whole. "A rescue!" she cried to him. "A rescue, all succour! An ye be a man of metal and sympathy, aid me now. I hate the Princess Alison Jocelyn, daughter to good King Giles, and him foully murdered by his brother, the bloody Duke Wolf, who hath ta'en my 3 brothers, the Princes Corin, Colin, and Calvin, and cast them into a foul prison as hostages that I will wed with his fat son, the Lord Dudley. But I bribed the sentinel and supped the dogs." But Schmendrick the magician raised his hand, and she fell silent, staring up at him in wonder out of wide lilac eyes. "Fair princess," he said gravely to her, "the man you want just went that way." And he pointed back toward the land they had so lately quitted. "Take my horse, and you'll be up with him while your shadow is still behind you." He cupped his hands for the Princess Alison Jocelyn, and she climbed wearily and in some bewilderment to the saddle. Schmendrick turned the horse, saying, "You will surely overtake him with ease, for he will be riding slowly. He is a good man, and a hero greater than any cause is worth. I send all my princesses to him. His name is Lear." Then he slapped the horse on the rump and sent it off the way King Lear had gone, and then he laughed for so long that he was too weak to get up behind Molly and had to walk beside her horse for a while. When he caught his breath again, he began to sing, and she joined with him. And this is what they sang as they went away together, out of this story and into another. "I am no king, and I am no lord, and I am no soldier at arms," said he. "I'm none but a harper, and a very poor harper, that am come hither to wed with ye. If you were a lord, you should be my lord, and the same if you were a thief," said she. "And if you are a harper, you shall be my harper, for it makes no matter to me, for it makes no matter to me. But what if it prove that I am no harper, that I lied for your love most monstrously? Why then I'll teach you to play and sing, for I dearly love a good harp," said she. And this is the last illustration of the story.
And that is the end of The Last Unicorn. What'd you guys think? Gosh, now I have to see the movie of it. See if it compares at all to the illustrations in my imagination. It probably won't, but I should see it anyway. It's a classic and I know everybody likes it. That was a really pretty story, very dreamlike. Sometimes the descriptions were a little. Sometimes I feel like the descriptions got away from the author, but I think it was a really lovely story. Thank you so much for being part of this with me. Thank you for listening to me read this story to you. Despite it not being like the end of anything really, I am a little sad that this is the last story that this account's gonna have for a little while. But it's time to properly launch my new channel soon and I'll start reading stories on there, so really, what's ending? But thank you so much for being here. I know that ran a little bit, but I think those chapters were really good. Um, what a beautiful story. Thanks so much for being part of this. Proper tuber channel launch. I'm still on the fence if that's going to be tomorrow or if that's going to be Friday. I have no idea. But either way, whenever it drops, I'm gonna basically I'll have my little debut and then I'll do I'll try to do maybe like a short story read or something like that. Um, or otherwise I'll make a separate stream and we'll start Signer 4. But yeah, I think that was really fun. So thank you for being here. Thank you for listening, and I hope that you guys are looking forward to this next leg of the journey as much as I am. So, well, until next time, make sure to eat well, stay hydrated, get lots of good rest, and as always, make sure to unshrimp yourself. Take care, everybody. Have a radiant rest of your day. Bye.